Wyoming Territory, spring of 1877. The fire started just after midnight, and by dawn, Delia Dawson's world was nothing but smoke and ash. She stood barefoot in the blackened grass, her cotton nightdress clinging to her legs, the scorched remnants of her family's farmhouse crackling behind her. The wind carried the bitter scent of charred wood and chickens that had not made it out. Her palms were blistered from trying to save what she could. In the end, she had run with nothing but the clothes on her back and a cracked locket around her neck. She had no husband to turn to. He had died 2 winters ago in a logging accident up near the Bighorn Mountains. No parents either, just her and the land, and now the land had turned to soot. By noon, she was walking the wagon road northeast, every step throbbing in her feet. No one had come to help. No one lived near enough. The closest ranch was a day's walk away. She headed there because she had no other choice. The sun was dipping low when she first saw the outline of the homestead fences stretching wide, a gray barn, a stone chimney rising from a low, slung ranch house. Her legs almost gave out from relief. A man stepped out of the barn as she approached, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, 30 at most, with a sun-worn face, dark hair falling into his eyes, and a look that could have been carved from the side of a mountain. He stopped when he saw her, and his dark eyes narrowed as he took in her soot-streaked face and torn dress. "You lost?" he asked, voice low and rough. Delia shook her head. "My farm burned last night, near Cotton Creek. I walked." He looked past her like he expected someone else to be behind her. "You alone?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, then tossed the rag aside and came toward her. "Come inside, you look ready to fall over." She hesitated. "I do not want charity." "I am not offering any," he said, "just a roof and food. You can decide what comes next after you have some water." She followed him in silence. The house was plain but clean, with a stone hearth and wooden floors scrubbed smooth. He gave her a blanket and set a cup of water in her hands without asking more questions. "I am Kolton Ellery," he said after a moment. "This is my place, Delia Dawson." He nodded once. "You can stay the night. After that we will talk." She nodded too, slow and grateful. Her throat was still raw from smoke. "Thank you." He set a bowl of stew in front of her. She had not realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. She ate in silence while he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her as if trying to see past the ashes. Later, as the fire in the hearth burned low, he brought out a spare bedroll and set it near the stove. "You will be warm here," he said. "You need rest." She laid down without protest. Her body ached too much to argue. She felt his gaze on her for a moment, then the soft sound of boots moving away. That night she slept without dreams. By morning she was already outside, hauling water from the well. When Kolton stepped out and saw her, his brow lifted. "You did not need to do that," Delia shrugged. "I do not sit idle." He looked at her a moment longer, then nodded. "Good, I do not keep folk who do." She stayed. For the first few days, she worked in silence, feeding the hens, scrubbing the kitchen, mending torn shirts she found stacked in a basket near the hearth. He gave her space, but he watched her, always with that same unreadable look. One evening, it rained hard and she found Kolton in the barn, brushing down his gelding. "I do not know how to thank you," she said, stepping in out of the downpour. He looked up, quiet for a long moment. "I do not do much talking, but I reckon you do not need to." She stepped closer. "I do not have anywhere to go." Kolton set the brush aside and looked at her straight. "Then maybe you stay here if you want." Her throat tightened. "And work," he nodded. "Plenty to do. I could use the help." She met his eyes. "I could use the shelter." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly, but something warmer than before. By the second week, they moved together like they had been doing it for years, her kneading dough while he chopped wood outside, her voice the only one filling the quiet house. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did talk, it was honest and plain. "I lost someone too," he said one night without warning. "My younger brother. Fever took him last November." Delia, kneeling by the fire, looked up. "You cared for him, raised him mostly." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. After Pa died, I was not much older than him, but I tried. What was his name, Matthew? She stared into the flames. My husband's name was Elijah. We had no children. Kolton stepped closer, leaning against the hearth. The land has a way of taking more than it gives. Delia looked up at him, her voice soft. Sometimes it gives back. He met her eyes, and for a moment there was nothing but the firelight between them. Spring turned to early summer. Delia's hands grew calloused again, and color returned to her cheeks. Kolton started leaving a cup of coffee for her each morning before heading out to mend fences. She started leaving biscuits wrapped in cloth for him to take. One night after supper, she found him out by the corral, leaning on the fence. You are always out here alone, she said. He looked over. Not so alone lately. Delia stepped beside him. You are not the only one who lost people, he nodded. But you are the only one who stayed. She turned to face him. And I will keep staying if you want me to. Kolton looked at her for a long time, then reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I want you to. Delia's breath caught. She leaned in, and he met her halfway, his hand sliding to the small of her back as their lips met, soft, steady, sure. It was not rushed. It was not desperate. It felt like shelter. When they pulled apart, she stayed close, her voice barely a whisper. It has been a long time since I felt safe. Kolton rested his forehead against hers. And a long time since I felt anything at all. They stood that way until the stars came out and neither of them moved away. The wind carried the scent of cut hay, mingling with the quiet creak of wagon wheels as Delia leaned over the side of the cart, her fingers brushing the tops of the dried stalks they'd gathered from the south pasture. Kolton guided the team slow and steady, eyes on the worn track that curved toward the storage barn. He hadn't spoken much since morning, but the silence didn't carry weight. It just was. Delia shifted on the bench, brushing hay from her skirt. That lower field's holding more than I expected. Kolton gave a short nod, his hat low against the sun. Rain held right this spring. That helped. She studied the line of his jaw, roughened with stubble. You always work this place alone, since Matthew passed, he said, not turning. Before that, it was just the two of us. She glanced away, watching a kestrel dip low over the fence line. When I was small, I used to think two people could manage anything if they just didn't give up. Kolton's hands tightened slightly on the reins. You were more hopeful than most. Delia didn't answer. The wind shifted, cooling as it came down from the high ridge. They rode in silence the rest of the way to the barn. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the dry bite of cedar. Kolton backed the wagon into its usual place, and together they unloaded the bales wordlessly, lifting and stacking in a rhythm that didn't need speaking. When they finished, he leaned against the wall, pulling his gloves off finger by finger. You ever think of leaving Wyoming? He asked, eyes on the far wall. Delia wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve. Not once I married. Elijah wanted roots. I did too. Kolton nodded slowly. I tried once, after the war, got as far as Cheyenne. Couldn't find enough quiet. She looked over at him. You weren't meant for towns. No, he looked at her then, steady and full. You weren't either. The air between them held still. Then Delia stepped forward, brushing sawdust from her hands. You said you don't do much talking. That's still true. Kolton's mouth pulled into something near a smile. Only when I don't have anything worth saying. She lifted her chin. And now I've got something to say. Delia waited, not pressing. I don't want you to go, he said simply. She studied him, her voice quiet but even. I wasn't planning on it. That night, she baked bread for the first time since the fire. She found a jar of dried sage in the pantry and folded it into the dough, the scent reminding her of her mother's kitchen long before anything had gone wrong. Kolton washed up in the basin by the back door, rolling his sleeves to the elbows. When he came inside, he paused, the warmth of the oven brushing across his face. You made bread, she nodded, setting the tin to cool on the window ledge. Felt like the house could use the smell. He stepped forward, reaching for a cloth. Smells like something good's coming back. She looked at him, really looked, and felt something steady settle in her chest. You ever consider that maybe it never left? Later, as dusk folded over the plains, they sat on the porch. The stars came out slow, one by one. Delia leaned back in the rocker, her fingers brushing against Kolton's where their hands rested on the arm between them. "I used to dread the dark," she said, voice low. "Now it feels like a blanket." Kolton turned his hand, letting their palms press together. "That's what it's supposed to feel like." And they stayed like that, quiet, side by side, the wind carrying the scent of sage and earth through the open land that stretched before them. By the end of June, the soil had warmed enough for planting the late vegetables. Delia knelt in the kitchen patch behind the house, slipping seeds into shallow furrows. Her nails were packed with dirt, her braid hanging loose down her back. The land here was different from her old place, flatter, with fewer rocks, but she'd begun to understand its rhythms. The soil needed patience. So did Kolton. He was in the shed when she brought him the mended saddle girth, sweat darkening the back of his shirt. She didn't speak right away, just handed it over. He turned it in his hands, testing the stitching. "That'll hold," he said, then quieter. "You always sew this clean." "My mother taught me before I could read. She said a crooked seam meant a careless mind." He looked up at that, and something shifted in his expression, respect maybe, or something close to pride. "I never learned sewing," he said. "Matthew tried once, got blood on the fabric before he'd made it 2 inches. Delia smiled faintly. "I've bled through more thimbles than I can count, still worth it." He set the girth aside. "You miss your teaching?" "I miss the girls, their questions. The way they'd argue over words like they were coins." She leaned against the doorway. "But there's no schoolhouse left, nothing to go back to." Kolton rubbed the back of his neck. "I could build a wall shelf in the front room for your books if you wanted them out." She tilted her head. "You offering space or permanence?" "I reckon both." He didn't flinch when he said it. That mattered more than she let on. Later that week, a stranger rode up from the eastern ridge, his coat dusty, a rifle slung across his back. Kolton met him at the gate, Delia keeping to the porch with her hand near the kitchen knife resting on the banister. The man said his name was Greaves, and that he was looking for a pair of strays that busted through a fence 2 nights prior. He had a U.S. brand on his shoulder and a wary way of watching the house. Kolton kept his answers short. "Ain't seen any cattle that don't belong." Greaves's eyes flicked toward Delia. "You his wife?" Kolton stepped slightly sideways, not aggressive, but enough. "She's with me." The rider offered a nod, neither friendly nor rude, then turned his horse and rode on. Delia waited until the dust settled before speaking. "You think he believed you?" "I didn't say it for him." That night, Kolton brought out a box from beneath the floorboards, a tin of cartridges, a worn compass, and a thick envelope tied with twine. "I kept these from the war," he said, laying the items out on the table. "Not because I wanted to remember, just couldn't throw them away." Delia touched the compass. "You ever think about what you'd do if you hadn't come back?" "I'd have missed this," he said. "This quiet, this chance." She slid her hand across the table, her fingers resting over his. "You didn't lose it." They stayed like that, the oil lamp casting ochre light across the wood. Come July, the nights grew longer and warmer. Delia began sleeping in the front room, closer to the breeze that moved through the open windows. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west, low thunder grumbling through the hills. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the clouds gather. Kolton came up beside her. "You afraid of lightning?" "Not since I was 12. It split a tree near our porch." "My father said it was just the sky shouting." He watched her a long moment. "You ever want children?" She didn't answer right away. "I did, we tried, it never happened." He nodded. "Matthew wanted a family, I didn't know how to tell him I wasn't ready." Delia turned to him. "You would be now." Kolton looked down at her, quiet except for the wind. "With you, I would." When the rain came, they didn't move. It soaked the earth and tapped against the roof like a steady hand. Kolton reached for her, not with urgency, but with the kind of certainty that comes only after waiting. They didn't speak as he led her inside. They didn't need to. After, she lay beside him, breath even, his hand resting just above her hip. Outside, the storm passed north, leaving the air clean and the world smelling of wet cottonwood. Delia whispered, "It doesn't feel like shelter anymore." Kolton's voice was low against her neck. "No, it feels like home." The first calf came early that August, born in the soft hush before sunrise. Kolton had heard the mare's restless pacing through the open barn window and was already halfway into his boots when Delia stirred on the pallet beside him. "Something wrong?" she asked, voice still husky with sleep. "Just the brindle heifer. She's dropping." Delia sat up, gathering her braid. "I'll come with you." He didn't argue. By the time they reached the barn, the sky was paling to that quiet blue that comes before the sun breaks fully. The heifer was lying near the far stall, sides heaving, sweat glistening on her hide. Kolton knelt beside her, quiet and sure, while Delia fetched clean rags from the tack shelf without needing to be asked. "She's straining too long," he muttered, pressing a hand to the cow's flank. Delia crouched beside him. "You need me to hold anything?" Just her calm. "That's more use than a rope." The calf came slow, hooves first, slick with birth and trembling. Kolton cleared the nostrils while Delia wrapped the little body tight in burlap. The heifer nuzzled her calf weakly, eyes glassy with exhaustion. Kolton sat back on his heels. "She's done her part. Now we just wait." Delia leaned against the stall, breath rising in steam. "They always make it look harder than it is, and somehow easier." He glanced at her. "You ever helped deliver before?" "Only once. A neighbor's milk cow. I was 14. Thought I might faint." He chuckled low, the sound rare enough to make her look over. "You didn't?" "No," she said, folding her arms, "but I didn't eat meat for 3 days." The calf bleated, and they both turned toward the noise. The heifer was licking it clean now, her body spent but willing. Kolton stood and offered Delia a hand up. "You're better than fainting these days." She took it, and when she rose, she didn't let go. Midday brought heat that pressed down like a wool blanket. Delia worked beneath the cottonwoods near the creek, soaking beans and peeling the last of the root vegetables from storage. Kolton had left early to ride the fence line, and for the first time since the fire, the stillness didn't feel hollow. A wagon came up the ridge near supper time. Delia spotted it from the porch, the sun throwing long shadows behind the wheels. A woman drove it, older, with a wide-brimmed bonnet and a square jaw that looked carved from old stone. Behind her sat a boy, maybe 11, his boots too large and his eyes sharp. Delia stepped off the porch as they pulled up. The woman didn't dismount. "I'm looking for Kolton Ellery," she said, voice dry as sun-bleached grass. Delia wiped her hands on her apron. "He's out riding, should be back before dark." The woman's eyes didn't soften. "I'm his aunt." "Name's Mabel Kressler. This here's my grandson Owen." Delia nodded slowly. "I'm Delia Dawson." Mabel studied her a moment, then climbed down without help, dusting off her skirt. The boy followed, taking in the house, the barn, the fields. "You're staying here?" Mabel asked. "I am. With him?" "Yes." The older woman's gaze flicked once toward the empty corral, then back. "He write you in one of those soldier letters, or you just end up here like a stray?" Delia met her stare without blinking. "I walked here after my home burned. He offered shelter. I stayed." Mabel's mouth twitched, not quite approval, not quite disapproval. "Well, you look fed, so I guess he's doing something right." Delia didn't offer a reply. She led them inside, set water to boil, and laid out bread and preserves. Owen ate 2 slices without lifting his head. Mabel only drank water. Kolton returned just as the sun tipped behind the ridge, his shirt damp with sweat and dust on his sleeves. He stopped short when he saw them, then moved forward with a slow nod. "Aunt Mabel." "You didn't write," she said. "I didn't figure you were waiting." "I wasn't. But I heard you'd lost Matthew, thought I'd see it for myself." His eyes flicked to the boy. "This him?" "Owen's my daughter's son." Kolton crouched to the boy's level. "You know how to ride?" The boy nodded. "Better than Ma." Kolton stood again. "Then you can stay a while. We'll find room." Mabel folded her arms. "Didn't say we were staying. You came all this way." She looked at Delia, then back at her nephew. "We'll stay 3 nights. For Matthew, then we'll see." That evening, after the dishes were washed, Kolton joined Delia outside. The moon was rising, pale and round, casting silver across the fields. "She's not here for me," he said, arms folded across his chest. "She's here for what you lost," Delia answered. He nodded. "That boy's got a sharp tongue. He'll wear me thin. You'll manage." They stood in companionable quiet, the sound of cicadas humming from the grass. Then Kolton turned to her, his voice gentler than usual. "You didn't flinch today, not once. I've been through worse, I know, but still." Delia reached for his hand. "You've given me something steady, I don't forget that." He leaned in, pressing his lips to her temple. "Neither do I." The barn lantern flickered behind them, and the scent of dry hay drifted from the loft. Somewhere out in the dark, the brindle heifer lowed to her calf, and it answered, soft and sure. The mornings had turned sharp by the 3rd week of August, the air carrying a bite that hadn't been there before. Kolton rose early, as he always did, but on this morning he paused at the edge of the bed, watching Delia's hair spill across the pillow. Her breathing was even, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. He let himself look a moment longer before stepping into his boots and heading out. By the time the sun crested the eastern slope, the boy Owen was already by the barn, whittling a small stick with a stubby blade. Kolton joined him, leaning against the rail. "You sleep all right?" Owen didn't look up. "The roof creaks different than home." Kolton nodded slowly. "You'll get used to it." "Ma said I'd have to." "She talk much about your granddad?" "No, just said he was more stubborn than smart. I figured that meant she missed him." Kolton didn't smile, but something eased in his eyes. He was stubborn. He built most of this place with his own 2 hands. Owen ran his thumb along the edge of the wood. "You think he would have liked me?" Kolton watched the boy, his face unreadable for a long moment. "He'd have taught you how to drive nails straight." "Then told you to do it again." Owen's mouth tugged into the barest grin. "Sounds all right." Inside, Mabel was packing a tin of dried apples into the wagon, her movements brisk. Delia watched from the doorway, wiping flour from her wrists. "You're heading out, then?" Mabel tied the tin closed with a strip of muslin. "My daughter's expecting us back before the frost. She'll be glad to have you." "She'll be glad to have her son, more like." Delia stepped down onto the packed ground. "You're welcome back if you ever want to see how he's doing." Mabel glanced up, eyes narrowing. "You mean if I want to see how you're doing?" Delia didn't flinch. "That too." The older woman studied her for a long beat, then nodded once. "You're not what I expected. I'm not trying to be." Mabel's mouth pulled tight. "Good." They left before midday. Owen waved once from the wagon bed, and Kolton lifted a hand in return. As the wheels creaked away down the ridge, Delia stepped beside him. "She's not easy. She's not meant to be. You think he'll remember us?" Kolton glanced at her. "If he's smart, he'll remember what felt steady." The garden had come in fuller than either of them predicted. Delia spent long stretches beneath the sun-dappled shade of the cottonwoods, preserving what she could. Kolton built shelves in the cool cellar, rough-hewn but sturdy. Occasionally, they shared a look across the kitchen when a jar sealed with a pop or the bread rose better than expected. The kind of look that said, without needing to say, "We did this." One evening, as the sun bled down the sky in streaks of copper and rose, Kolton brought in a cedar box wrapped in a grain sack. He set it on the kitchen table without a word. Delia raised an eyebrow. "That for me or the pantry, for you?" She unfolded the sack slowly. Inside was a folded piece of blue calico, thick enough for a dress, and a small book of pressed flowers tied with twine. Her fingers traced the fabric. "Where did you get this?" Traded feed with the mercantile driver out of Rawlins. Told him to bring something fine. She looked up at him, something soft but rooted in her expression. "Why?" Kolton's voice was low. "Because you make this place more than it was." She stepped around the table and laid her head against his chest. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. Then I'll sew it into something I can wear at our table for the harvest." He wrapped his arms around her and nodded against her hair. "We'll have one worth sitting down to." Autumn came in slow, gold-tipped and hushed. The nights cooled enough that Delia lit the hearth again, and Kolton brought in kindling each morning without being asked. They worked side by side, not just in the fields, but in the home, fixing what could be fixed, building what needed building. One Sunday, when the chores were light, Kolton rode out early and returned with Reverend Haskett from the Circuit Chapel 2 ridges west. The man wore a wool coat too heavy for the weather and smelled faintly of pipe smoke. Delia, caught in the middle of hanging linens, turned when she heard their horses. Kolton dismounted and didn't hesitate. "I'd like us joined proper." Delia looked from him to the Reverend, then back. "Now, if you'll have me." She stood there a moment, then carefully folded the last linen and set it in the basket. "I've already had you, Kolton Ellery, but yes, now is fine." They married beneath the cottonwoods, with the wind soft in the leaves and the scent of drying apples in the air. No guests, no paper flowers, just the two of them, and a man with a Bible and a voice that didn't carry far. Kolton held her hand like it was the last solid thing in the world. That night they sat on the porch, the oil lamp dim between them. No words passed. They didn't need them. By winter's first frost, the shelves were full, the roof patched tight, and the chimney swept clean. Delia wore the blue calico dress to supper on the first snow. Kolton didn't say anything about it, but he reached for her hand under the table and held it until the plates were cleared. Years passed. The land held steady. Children never came, but the house never felt empty. They taught Owen letters through the mail, sent preserves to Mabel each fall, and added a new room to the house facing east where the sun touched first. They grew older together. Wrinkles came, and with them, deeper laughter. They buried the brindle heifer out near the cottonwoods when her legs finally gave out. Kolton carved her name into a small post and drove it into the earth himself. One spring, Delia planted lavender where the barn met the fence line, and Kolton built a bench beside it. They sat there often, knees touching, saying little. And when the years had folded them into something deeper than habit, something rooted like the old trees behind the house, Kolton leaned over one still morning and whispered, "I'd do it all again." Delia, brushing a leaf from his shoulder, replied, "You already have." Every day. They lived out their years in the home they built, side by side, until the world around them slowed to their rhythm, and they were never alone again.